Hello, my friends. I am really excited about today's podcast guest. She is a friend of mine, a colleague. We met in our FAM certification a couple of years ago, and we have stayed in touch and became good friends. And I'm really excited to have her back because she has some updates on her health, her cycle charting. And so, without further ado, let me introduce to you Haley Smith. Haley is a nutritionist and she is a certified fertility awareness practitioner. And she specializes in helping women optimize their cycles for fertility. And I last interviewed Haley in June of last year. You can find her first episode. It is episode number 15, How Diet and Exercise Affect Fertility. And I'm really excited to have her back today. So, hi, Haley. How are you doing?
Hello, I'm good. So good to be back.
Yeah, thanks for coming back. So the last time we had you on the show, you were at the tail end of your training for your marathon and had mentioned to the listeners, and we chatted about noticing quite a bit of a shift in your cycle parameters, so your FAM cycle charts, based on your training regimen. And it's been about 7 months since then. And as both of us know and continue to educate our communities and our clients, it takes so many months for the body to actually heal and shift until we start to see this like positive progression in cycle charting, especially when working towards what we like to call healthy cycle parameters. So I know you have some updates on that, and I'm really excited to hear and have you share because I think when we share our personal stories, especially as women ourselves who cycle chart ourselves and who help women do this for their own personal health and to get pregnant, it's so much more empowering and makes it so much more real when we can share our personal stories. So, thank you for being vulnerable and taking the time to share this with my community. I appreciate it. So I'll kind of throw it over to you. And why don't you give us kind of an update on how your marathon went, even though it was like such a long time ago now, it feels like at least.
Yeah.
Um, and then what you've been doing to kind of come back from um, I don't want to say the damage you did because it wasn't necessarily damage, but I'll let you choose the appropriate words for
No,
how, right? Like
totally.
for how you've kind of come around to where you are now with regards to your cycle and your reproductive
Sure. I don't think damage is too far off. Depleting is a
health.
good word for it. I definitely depleted myself. Yeah, I'm so grateful to be back here because you're right. We talked, I believe it was like a week and a half before the actual race. And just to clarify, it was a half marathon, not a marathon.
Oh,
I'm not that crazy. Um,
it's still
half
a big accomplishment. So
No,
congratulations.
thank you. Thank you. It did feel really good. And yeah, so it's been about a year. I think I started training for it exactly a year ago at the beginning of February, and the actual race was Memorial Day. So first beginning of June or so. But yes, I mean, I can speak to it much more in depth in retrospect. And I should have gone back to listen to the episode because I'm not sure how much I shared leading in at that time, but there was a lot of pillars or factors that went into it. And I'll start with my motivation to start training for the race. It's something I have a history of running. I grew up running cross country, and it's something that I always wanted to do, just never prioritized. And then I finally committed to it in the aftermath of a really hard breakup. And it was also post winter, and I'm in the Pacific Northwest where it's very dark, very gray. So I just needed something just to get me out, lift my spirits a little bit, and I committed to it. So I bring that up to say, yes, there was a physical strain of training, which had a huge impact, but there was also the huge component of the stress I was going through because of the aftermath of the breakup. And on top of how rigorous I was training, what I call the foundational factors of fertility, I can say in retrospect, like they were all hanging on by a thread, which the foundational factors I work with my clients with is stress, exercise, diet, and movement. Did I miss one? Stress, diet, exercise. I'm missing
Movement.
one.
Is there supplements or is
Sleep.
that a
Oh,
pillar?
sleep. Did I say sleep?
Sleep. No, you didn't.
Sleep. Thank you. So all four of those were had shifted. So besides the running, I wasn't eating as much as I should have been. The stress was affecting my sleep. I had many, many sleepless nights throughout my training and throughout the entire year. And I think what's really interesting is reflecting on it because of what I was going through. Those were all hanging on by a thread, but I can say that I also went into that training with probably not very rich nutrient stores. And I can take it back even further to I kind of start my cycle reflection kind of when I ended birth control is when my story starts. I went on the pill late high school and then took it all throughout college. So it was about like a 4 or 5 year process. And whenever I finally quit the pill cold turkey, that's when my health symptoms completely blew up. I had crazy, crazy gut issues. Oh my gosh. I was bloated all the time, constantly constipated. And I also was dealing with crazy skin breakouts that I never had before.
And how many, I'm just going to ask you a quick question.
Mm-hmm.
How many years were you on the pill before you came off?
It was about 4 to 5 years.
4 to 5 years on the pill. And this was how long ago? How many years ago was that?
Yeah, good question. So let me think. I started it in 2009 and then got off of it 2014.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay.
So 2014. So as soon as I stopped, everything kind of blew up immediately, which
Right.
I can understand better knowing the side effects of the pill and what that does to our body. But so I got off the pill, and at that time when everything was blowing up, I was also in tandem moving out west to Oregon to begin my graduate work in nutrition. So I was depleted from the pill, and then I started this graduate program where I was learning about all these therapeutic diets, which included things like the keto diet and intermittent fasting and all these modalities. And I was also at the time diagnosed with SIBO. So then I started all these SIBO protocols. And I say all this to say a lot of the therapeutic diets I was trying included things like fasting and included things like cutting out certain food groups. So that had been my experience. And at the time, I wasn't tracking my cycle. I hadn't started fertility awareness. And as far as I know, my cycles were okay. But when I started strategically tracking my cycle, I would have really, really low temperatures. That was the first thing I noticed. So whenever I started learning more about fertility awareness method and getting trained in it, I was like, okay, I need to make some changes. So I would start to eat more meat, and I saw my temperatures rise. But, and then whenever you and I started our certification with Lisa Hendrickson Jack of Fertility Friday, I was like, oh, there's a lot of room for improvement here. So I made changes, and my cycles were okay. Like they were healthy lengths. My periods were decent. But one of the biggest things I noticed was that I never had a lot of cervical mucus. So that was one thing that I was always really deficient in. So I say all this to say that's kind of where my cycles were whenever I went into the half marathon training.
Got it.
And the breakup and the stress and the sleepless nights and not eating as much as I should.
Mm-hmm.
So going into that, my nutrient stores were very depleted. And I think the running and everything else just put me over the edge. So it was about exactly a year ago, February or March, when my cycles completely tanked. I was watching my temperatures tank, zero cervical mucus, and I had my first anovulatory cycle. I think it was February or March.
So
It might
sorry,
have been March.
just to clarify, you said an ovulatory cycle, so meaning you did not ovulate.
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
And I will say too, because you and I know this, but I just want to make sure that uh, for the listeners, how would you know if you are not ovulating if you are not cycle charting? Or sorry, I just answered the question. I meant, how did you know that you were not ovulating?
Yeah, fair enough. The only reason I knew is because I was cycle charting.
Exactly.
And what gave it away was I never had a temperature shift. Again, going
Yes.
into this, I knew that I never had a lot of cervical mucus, so I didn't judge it based off of that, but my temperatures were always low. They were always pre-ovulatory temps, which is hovering about 97.4. But again, whenever I started training in this way, I was watching them go even lower, like into the 96s or high 96s, and I'm speaking in Fahrenheit.
Yes.
And so what happened that first month or so into training was I started bleeding without any temperature shift. So I never had that post-ovulatory shift, because whenever progesterone rises, that's what happens in our body. And I had a breakthrough bleed because we know that whenever we don't ovulate, it's not a true period, but more so
Mm-hmm.
a breakthrough bleed. So I remember it was like it ended up being like a 20-day cycle where I was like, it was completely unexpected because I historically have like 28, 30-day cycles. So then
Mm-hmm.
a month into training, it was like 20 days and it was this unexpected bleed. And I was like, oh my gosh. And again, so that was March or so. And then I continued to have anovulatory cycles or cycles I didn't ovulate the majority of 2022. Even because then the race was in June. And then since then, I was really rebuilding it. And I didn't have a ovulatory cycle until last September. So I went the majority of 2022 without ovulatory cycles, which was a huge shock. And to your point, where you were saying the introduction, I knew, like, I know mentally that, like, yes, it takes time to rebuild cycles, but to experience it myself and to see what I had to do to get that back, huge learning curve. And to experience it firsthand, I just empathize with my clients a lot, and I can see what it takes to get there. And it takes a whole lot of patience.
A whole lot of patience and a whole lot of targeted nutrition. You're going back to your foundational pillars. Targeted, I say targeted
Mm-hmm.
because we really need to focus on, certain key nutrients and macronutrients and supplements too. Like supplements are a
Mm-hmm.
big part of the process as well. You can do tons with food, but also based on where your gut is as well, right? How well is your body assimilating and absorbing these nutrients? Sometimes you have to do some healing of the gut, like you had mentioned. Even back when you stopped birth control, you were diagnosed with SIBO. By the way, for those who don't know what SIBO is, it's small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. I released a podcast last week about is your gut healthy for pregnancy? And I had a client who was on birth control for like over a decade. She got off birth control, tried to get pregnant, got pregnant. Sorry, she wasn't trying to get pregnant. She was planning on preparing her body for pregnancy, randomly got pregnant, but then suffered from a pregnancy loss. Not long after that, started working with me. Was like, I'm always bloated. My body feels so inflamed, tight. My neck hurts all the time. Long story short, after like 2 months of trying to figure out what was wrong with her, we finally did all the testing. High food sensitivities, like every food she was sensitive to. And she had like huge candida overgrowth. So we literally had to flip the script and then focus on our gut and do a anti-candida protocol. So there's so many pieces to the puzzle. Like I'm just sharing that because everybody has their own story and their own pathway for kind of what this looks like. But going back to this targeted approach with regards to like nutrition supplements, finding the right practitioner, like makes the process and the journey, I guess, a little bit more less
Yes.
stressful or easy.
Right, or just more guided. And I love
Yes,
that you said that because whenever we think of fertility and hormones, we don't automatically think of like, oh, I wonder how my gut is. I wonder how I'm absorbing food. But it's huge.
exactly.
So many hormones are made in the gut. And yeah, absolutely. I think that's why I didn't want to dismiss like my experience coming off the pill, because I do think that played a role however many years later into this last year for me of not having cycles, because I was coming from just those nutrient stores that I think were barely full. I didn't have a lot of depth to them, which I think absolutely affected this past year.
So, question for you then. What can you share with us what you did, like some overarching big, like aha moments or things that you did to get your cycle back to an ovulatory cycle and um, how you know you actually ovulated?
Yeah, of course, I would love to. So I had a lot of fun with it. I mean, there was the two sides of me, like the practitioner that was like wanting to try these protocols and was just like so curious of like what it's going to take. And then of course, me as a person, I was more impatient. But no, it's been a lot of fun and just empowering to see how much effect we can have on it just through what we do every day. So after the marathon, I rested. Definitely took some time off. I don't think I've run more than I think there's one time I ran 4 miles, but I haven't run more than a mile or so, and
Mhm.
really stopped running altogether. And that was one of the biggest shifts is now I'm really prioritizing strength training and rest. So
Mhm.
after the race, it was slower than what it is now, but in general, my regimen is 3 to 4 days of strength training, and I consider walking my primary form of movement, and especially my primary form of cardio. So cut back on the excessive cardio, prioritize strength training and walking, and a lot of rest. And before I continue going, and I'll be happy to share everything I did, but I just want to give the disclaimer that this was my experience and this worked for me, and it can look different for every single person. And what worked for me might not work for you if you're someone who's working on building up your parameters or getting your cycle back. I do encourage a very individualistic approach. So I just want to give that disclaimer.
Yes.
But that was, yeah,
Can I ask
please.
one more question before you keep going? Just because also with regards to fertility and trying to conceive, can you share maybe with the audience where you are, like before we go into kind of what you did to get your cycle back? Like we both know, and I say this all the time, is like your most fertile, your healthiest self is your most fertile self. So if you're open to sharing, where are you in that stage and phase of your life? Are you preparing for pregnancy? Are you, yeah, I'll let you share. And then,
No, yeah, I'm
yeah.
glad you said that because that is a big part of this. No, I'm not preparing for pregnancy in the
Yet.
near future. Yes, correct.
Yeah.
So I do very much know I want children someday, but not, I imagine it being 3, 4, 5 years down the road.
Right.
So in the immediate near future, no. And whenever I did make that decision to run the half marathon, that was on my mind of like, okay, I know I'm nowhere near wanting to be on a fertility journey or trying to conceive. So that did play a role in making the decision to do it, because I knew the two are a mismatch. But yes, today I am not preparing for pregnancy in the next year or two, but it is something I want, which is how my focus has shifted to really preserving and optimizing my fertility and building it up as best I can and rebuilding the nutrient stores that I didn't have for a very long time now. So yes, good question.
Thank you for sharing. Yes.
Yeah, of course, I'm happy to. So besides shifting my primary form of exercise, I think it was after the marathon, I went pretty hard on the liver and organ meats. I think
You just hear Lisa's head inside of Lisa's voice inside of her head being like liver. We're all like, oh my God, if you say liver one more time.
I know. I was eating liver daily. And I found it in my grocery store, and I was eating actual liver, which is new to me. And then when I didn't have the actual liver, I was taking supplements. So definitely doing that. I've always been a breakfast eater. That was never something that I skipped, but I made it bigger. I would have bigger breakfasts, and historically I would just have a couple eggs and some side things, but I added some meat, breakfast sausage or beef sausage. So that has been a staple this past year. Therapy is a huge staple for me. That's my stress management practice. I don't know where I would be without it. So that remained a huge staple to manage the emotional, mental side of things. And sleep wherever I can. Sleep had never been a problem until I was just going through this really stressful period. And so really taking care of myself, making sure I'm going to bed earlier, prioritizing my sleep hygiene as best I can was huge. And it wasn't perfect. I mean, anxiety flares up and the first thing to go is my sleep. So it's a constant ebb and flow, but doing what I can to support it was huge. So really those things were my main staples. And I also ebb and flowed out of supplement protocols. I had a lot of fun, trying out different things. And I did implement some things that I think really helped. You and I have talked about iodine before, and I think that was a new one that I had implemented. I also did some testing, I should say. I tested my thyroid, I tested my iodine level, saw where I was deficient. So I didn't just blindly start taking these. But there were a few key supplements that I think worked for me. I also found some things that didn't work for me supplement-wise. And I say that just to say, supplements were there, but they weren't the constant. Those foundational factors of exercise, sleep, stress management, and eating I think what really moved the needle for me. Yeah. And it took time. And just a lot of patience. Like I said, I didn't have my first ovulatory cycle until September. So it was just.
So if we do the math, your half marathon and was the beginning of June. Right after the marathon was over, you were talking about these kind of your foundational pillars, eating more food, eating more protein with breakfast, getting the liver in. When would you say you started that? based on when that half marathon was over? Did you kind of start immediately? Because if we look and we can count like June, July, August, September, and you were on kind of like that, I'm going to call it the Haley protocol for Haley. That would have been like, was that 4 months then until you were able to see that shift in your body on your chart?
Yeah, great question. So I did start immediately after the
Hmm.
half marathon is whenever I started making these changes. So yeah, that was the very beginning of June. So June, July, August, September. Yeah, yeah, about 4 months
About
or
four
so.
months.
hmm Which, yeah, I'm glad you said that because I hadn't made that connection. But working with clients, I say, we at least have to give this 3 months,
Three. I say the same
at
thing, at
least three
least.
months.
Yeah.
Give your body time. And yeah, I guess that was true for me too.
So since then, would you say we're now in February of 2023, September, October, November? So it's been about 5 months. And have your cycles consistently improved? Have your temperatures increased? You're definitely having the thermal shift. Is your progesterone high enough? Are you seeing that 98.1 temp in your luteal phase?
Yes, yes. I what I'm most excited about is I have more cervical mucus now than I did
Hmm.
even before the marathon. Like I said, as soon as I started cycle charting, that was kind of the first obvious sign of like I'm not producing a lot of cervical mucus. But I
Hmm.
think was it last month I had 3 days of peak mucus, which is huge for me. Usually I have one
It's like
maybe. So
celebrate, right?
I know.
Celebration.
I was like, oh my gosh, there's more. So that was huge for me. Yeah, and my temperatures are solid. I am seeing that shift. I did have I think it was over Christmas. Was it last month where I had a short cycle, but there was a whole lot going on. I had
You're
stressful
traveling,
travel, and then I actually got
COVID.
COVID. I got COVID for the
Yeah.
first time at the beginning of the new year. So, you know, I think that
Yeah.
influenced it. But besides that, yeah, my cycles have been hard or really strong. They're back to the 28 to 30 days and
Hmm.
strong luteal phases, which I'm always most excited about whenever they're in that 12 to 14-day range.
Hmm.
And yeah, yeah, they're back and it's really exciting to see.
So let's talk about the cervical mucus component because this is a big one. This is a big one. I mean, with a lot of my clients are in their mid 30s to late 30s, even early 40s. And as we know, and myself as well, being 39 this year, um, I've always had I've always had consistent cycles and cervical mucus after I was also on birth control for 10 years from 15 to 25, got off for a little bit, then had the IUD in for 5 years. But since then, it's been about a decade. I haven't been on anything, and I've always noticed cervical mucus. But I will say, as I'm aging, that cervical mucus window is definitely getting shorter, and the cervical mucus isn't. There's still quite a bit, but there's definitely not as much as there used to be. So we know that cervical mucus is produced because of rising estrogen in the first half of the cycle, which is again why we say cycle parameters using the fertility awareness method. Every day you're going to collect data. You're essentially getting real time data about your fertility and reproductive health as you cycle chart. So there's something you and I like outside of this podcast. I mean, I know we can chat for hours about just this stuff because we love it so much. But why don't we? I want to get in just a little bit to the like egg health, the quality of egg health, and how that can be kind of seen through the cycle parameters, mainly even one of them being cervical mucus. So
Mhm.
as you're improving your cycle parameters and as you're improving your kind of reproductive health, you're actually also improving your egg quality because we know that it all starts with that egg. And I'll let you explain why, because maybe you can share like the life cycle of the egg, what that looks like, and how it's going to dictate how much estrogen you're producing, how much progesterone you're producing.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
why don't we go into dive into that a little bit?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I'm so glad you said that because I think in the fertility world, there's a lot of emphasis on progesterone and the luteal phase. We hear luteal phase defect a lot. And what I have tried to coach my clients on is if you are identified low progesterone and you have improved your foundational factors, then let's dig deeper. Let's keep going back because that progesterone is influenced by the egg health in that follicle, because that follicle is what becomes the corpus luteum, which the corpus luteum spews out the progesterone. So I love that you brought it back to the very beginning, and this is where we start. And that egg health that ovulates, it's recruited almost a year earlier. And then once it's recruited, it's about a 4-month process until it gets to the point where it's mature enough to ovulate. So again, thinking about when you want to conceive, you really can't start early enough. Like if you know you want to have a family, if you know you want to conceive in the near future, you really can't start too early, because again, that egg is recruited almost a year earlier. So building up your nutrient stores and focusing on the egg health is huge as soon as you can start. And whenever I think of supporting the egg health, I think a lot about antioxidants is huge through food and maybe supplements. And so starting with those foundational factors is huge. And then we can get really specific and tailored with the antioxidants and certain supplements. And I think of things like fatty acids is huge for cervical mucus production. Hydration is huge, making sure you're hydrated. That was a big part of my recovery too, of really filling myself up with electrolytes to make sure I'm hydrated. And I'm not sure if you have specific things that come to mind for egg health.
Yeah, well, antioxidants is definitely a big one. I would say stress. I mean, at the end of the day, the stress, because of the amount of inflammation that it can tamper on the body. And then with that systemic inflammation comes then a dampering of all systems, including the hormone system. And so as we know, every system is connected, right? Like nothing is in its own silo. So a big one that I see, and I mean, I think we can all attest to this, is being busy, stressed, having a lot on our plate, and trying to do everything that we can to optimize health. Now we're thinking about fertility, and we're slapping on this new set of, okay, now I'm not even just thinking about my overall health, but now I'm thinking I want to get pregnant. It can be that can be the stressor in itself that can push you over the edge. So yeah, stress is another big one that um, doesn't keep the body in its most optimal state, and kind of keeps you maybe more in like a sympathetic stressful state, which is not conducive to your hormones and gut health and all of the above.
No, I'm so glad you're emphasizing that, because our body's number one job is to keep us alive. And we're talking about like our metabolic system here. If it's going to not prioritize fertility if there's any threat to your survival. So if you are constantly in fight or flight mode, if your stress levels are constantly high, if your cortisol is through the roof, it is going to shut down your fertility to keep you alive. And what I like to say is, that's not, your body's working exactly how it should. It's keeping you alive. It's not going to let you produce and bring in new life if it's trying to save your own. That's a little dramatic, but if it's trying to, keep you functioning optimally, it's not going to be in a place to conceive and produce new life. So it's a good thing, because your body is so wise and it's doing exactly what it's meant to do, of keeping you alive. So the question is, okay, how do we peel back the layers, and why does it feel like it needs to fight to keep you alive? How can we remove some of these stressors? So I love that you're emphasizing that, because absolutely, the metabolic system is constantly talking to our reproductive system of what do we need to do to keep this person alive.
And you could see that specifically from your story at the beginning about, so again, we can have stress on our bodies in so many different ways. Our mental stress is a big part of that stress. But again, if and when somebody cycle charts, even a very mental stressful period can potentially put you in an anovulatory state. So when you did your training for the half marathon, again, this, even though, yes, you're running, you're exercising, this is great. You're building muscle, you're improving your endurance. But again, like, where's that fine balance when it comes to what is optimal for fertility, what optimal for women's reproductive health, especially when we're in those childbearing years and our goal is to procreate in the, few coming months ahead. But you can see from your story in and of itself, the exact example of your body was stressed from training for the half marathon, perhaps wasn't getting the right amount of nutrients. You came in a really already depleted state. You, on top of that, had your mental stress from what you were going through with your breakup. And so all of this was just like pushed on Haley, and then your chart was like, see, told you so.
So exactly right. And going back to like the nutrient stores, I think of them as like this bucket, like how full are they? And whatever I had in there was going towards supporting this crazy exercise I was doing and fueling myself for this. So there was nothing left to give to my
Mhm.
fertility or to create new life and ovulate. Because fertility in itself and the menstrual cycle, it's a huge metabolic activity. It takes a whole lot just to
Mhm.
cycle every month and bleed every month and
Yes.
ovulate. Not to mention when we're trying to become pregnant. That's a whole other level. But it's a huge metabolic activity. So if I was trying to run this half marathon, deal with these stressors of life and not sleeping well and not eating as much as I should be, then there's no room. There's no nutrients left to give to ovulate. So yeah, I'm so glad you said that. Stress
Mhm.
is huge.
Mhm. Mhm. There was something else I wanted to chat about with you, and just share with the listeners. Um, and it was, let me remember. Okay, I'm going to cut this part out because now I cannot remember. It was like literally on the
No
tip of my
problem.
tongue. It was on the tip of my tongue. Hold
That happens to me all the time.
on. Oh, I remember. So the other thing I wanted to chat with you about and just share with the listeners is this whole concept of, um, pretty much the health that you have going into pregnancy is not only going to impact the health of your child, but is also going to impact the health of your grandchild and your grandchild and children. Like it just keeps going way back. And the best image that always sticks in my mind is from one of my Bibles, which is called Taking Charge of Your Fertility by Toni Welsh. It is an incredible, incredible book. And she's got this beautiful image in there of like, it's just like a black and white, like hand drawn image of a pregnant woman. And it's from her periphery from the side. And you can see she's got her belly. And then inside the belly, you see they've drawn like a little fetus. And then inside the fetus, they've drawn the time, if it's a female fetus, of course. Inside the female fetus, they've also drawn um, little primordial eggs. So when a woman is pregnant with a female fetus, she is everything that she is doing, everything that her preconception health, how she was, I'm sorry, in her preconception health until she was pregnant, and then how her health is while she's pregnant is all going to affect not only that female fetus, but also the eggs that are inside of that female fetus, which to me is just like mind blowing. It's so interesting and it's so cool to see. So I know, Haley, we've talked about this whole concept of like generation, like how we can make our generations healthier and our babies healthier and our grandchildren healthier. And that literally starts with literally what you are putting on the end of your fork today, literally today.
Yes. Oh, this is one of my favorite topics. And it's so fascinating. And that's why fertility, this field, it can go so deep and it goes so far beyond just that positive pregnancy test. We are talking
Mm-hmm.
about an opportunity to create healthier generations. And yes, this is how it starts. And I've seen that image in various forms and it's beautiful. And it demonstrates it so beautifully of your health and your possible hormone imbalances or disorders that might have started out of your control when you were in your mother's womb. And it could go back to what your grandmother, how she lived her life. So, one, I like that just to give yourself some compassion of, I think of PCOS in particular.
Mm-hmm.
That's a huge one that we know starts in utero. So just having a lot of compassion for yourself and then taking this as an opportunity to, you can break this chain. You can be the one who kind of ends this cycle of hormone disorders. We see these young girls starting their periods early and earlier and off the gate having crazy symptoms, whether it be PCOS or endometriosis, primary endometriosis, or maybe they don't start cycling. Maybe they have amenorrhea. And that could have all started while they were in the womb. So yes, I think it's fascinating. Preconception is the greatest opportunity to make the imprint on your child and your grandchild's epigenetics from the get-go. And it's a beautiful, beautiful opportunity.
Mm-hmm. So, with that, I'm really excited to announce to the listeners is that you have something really special coming up with regards to um, I guess, preparing for pregnancy and optimizing fertility. And I'm really excited for you. And I'm also really excited because I get to be a part of it, which I'm so grateful for. So
Yeah.
can you share with our listeners what is coming up and how they can participate?
Yes. So I created a group experience weekend gathering. It's called the Fertility Freedom Summit. And this is for women who have either been on a fertility journey, whether it's been 3 months, whether it's been a year, whether it's been 2 years, or maybe you are gearing up to begin trying to conceive. You know you want to conceive. Again, like we said earlier, it's never too early to begin preparing. So wherever you are on your fertility journey, this weekend is for you to come hear from fertility experts in several different pillars of fertility and just sit in a group of women to prepare your mind, to prepare your body of pregnancy. And the motivation has multiple layers to it. But one, this information wasn't given to us from when it should have been at a young age. I talk to women every single day, whether they're in their 20s, 30s, or 40s, and I'm telling them how their body worked, and they're like, why was I never taught this? They're hearing for the first time how their menstrual cycle, how their body works. So I wanted to bring women together to hear that you are not alone. There's so much shame wrapped in it because we were never taught. We were never taught how our body works. And then, I think in 4th grade sex ed, we're taught the only way to avoid pregnancy is abstinence, just don't have sex. And that's simply not true. And then whenever we finally want to grow our family and it's not going the way that we thought, then a lot of shame comes with it. And what's wrong with me? What's wrong with my body? And I talk to women every day, like feeling like they are so alone. And so I'm like, all right, well, what's going to happen if I just bring all these women together to hear that you're not alone, to see that you're not alone, and the healing that can come from that in itself. And we're going to tackle on these information that you should have been taught from a long time ago, put some of this control back in your hands. Because I think oftentimes it can be the sense of like we just hand over our power to the doctors, to the people with the white coat, but they weren't taught these foundational factors. They were taught how to prescribe medication. So we're going to teach you on this weekend, yes, how to take care of the emotional body and the stress that comes with fertility. We have one of our first speaker is Dr. Jessica Liu, who's in Canada with you. And she is going to open up the day with a talk on the heart-womb connection. It's a beautiful talk. She is returning. She was with us last year at this weekend. And she describes the concept of traditional Chinese medicine that says conception cannot occur unless there's a healthy heart-womb connection. So it's beautiful. I think Dr. Liu's voice alone could
She's
heal a
so
lot.
soothing. I had her on the podcast with Dr. Nora Pope
Oh, good.
as
Yes.
well. I think it was one of the more beginning episodes talking all about cervical mucus, actually. And
So you know exactly what I'm talking about.
yes, I love her. She's amazing. So she's one of the speakers, which is on the heart womb connection. Oh, I can't wait to attend that one.
She is going to be opening up the day. And then we're going to get into the science. We're going to move on to environmental threats to fertility. And that's going to be with Dr. Britt Stamer, who is another naturopathic doctor out of Minnesota. And this is where we can make a huge impact on the epigenetics that we were just talking about, PCOS in particular.
Being the big one. Yeah.
Yes, there are so many toxins, so many threats that we didn't have for a really long time. And we're seeing it change reproductive hormones every single day. And it's not going anywhere anytime soon. So Dr. Stamer
actually it's going to get worse. There's
Correct.
They released
Correct.
how many new chemicals are introduced every week? I can't remember what the stat is, but I remember reading this somewhere that there's like every week there's like over a dozen new chemicals that are released and made that is coming out in the food system, that's coming out in our agriculture system. It's scary.
So that's terrifying. Yes. So what I appreciate about Dr. Stamer is she takes this really heavy, really scary topic and makes it really bite-sized and empowering of what can you control. And also just, reassures us of our body was made to detox. It was made to detox. It is very, very resilient. But how can we just lessen the load, lessen the burden, and optimize these detox pathways and lean into our body's resiliency? So she will be the second session of the day. This is a one-day event. And then we have you, and I'm so grateful that you will be joining us to talk about optimizing fertility using food as medicine. I love you have created such a step-by-step digestible approach, no pun intended, to how we can use food in your 4R system. And I'm not sure if
Mhm.
do you want to speak to it a little bit?
Yeah, the 4R method. So I'll be diving into the 4Rs on how to optimize fertility through nutrition. And the first one is all about remove and what you should be removing from your diet to kind of take away those inflammatory, mainly inflammatory toxic foods that are compromising digestion, compromising hormones, that are compromising cortisol and blood sugar levels. So we'll dive into the first R, which is remove. The second R is all about replace. What are the foods that you need to replace these foods that you've removed with so that we can optimize fertility? And the third R, and we've talked about this, and it's a big obsession of mine, is repair. How do we repair the gut? Because in order for us to actually utilize this food as medicine, our engine or our digestive tract is what needs to be in optimal condition to be able to actually utilize these foods and excrete the toxic waste. You could be eating the
Yes.
healthiest diet in the world, but if you have a compromised gut, it is not really going to do much for you. So, the third R is all about repair, repairing your gut. And then the fourth R is rebalance. One of my biggest tips, and I say this to everybody, is just like balance your blood sugar. Learn how to balance your blood sugar, and this is going to help you balance your hormones. So, there's a couple additional pieces in there about how we will rebalance the body. But that's kind of the overview of what the 4R method looks like.
Oh, I'm so excited for that. Beautiful. And again, what we're getting at is what I think of as like the bones of fertility. At the core of every natural fertility optimization plan is going to be diet. You can't get around it. And
Mm-hmm.
so we're going to dive into that. And then I will be coming on to do a session on cycle charting like a detective. So yes, we all can, find ways to know when we're fertile, when we're not fertile. But what I'm going to lead this session in is how can you kind of take it a step further and use your chart to identify those hormone gaps and to put some of this empowerment back in your hands. So when you are in the doctor's office, you can advocate for yourself a little more. One of the
Mm-hmm.
examples I give and see my clients use a lot is being able to identify ovulation is going to do wonders for you. For example, it is so common that you go to your medical doctor's office and they say, let's test progesterone on day 21 of your cycle.
Mm-hmm.
That can set you up for a negative domino effect that might lead you to medication and artificial reproductive technology that would not be necessary if you just identified ovulation correctly and tested progesterone
Correctly.
correctly. Thank you.
Correct. That
Yes.
is correct.
Because that 21-day test is assuming that you ovulated on day 14, because we want to test progesterone about 7 days after you ovulate. But we know a very, very, very small percentage of women, myself included, actually ovulate on day 14. I myself am like a day like 19, 20 ovulator. So testing my progesterone at day 21 would do nothing for me. It would be so low. And then the doctor might tell me, oh, we need to get you on medication or progesterone supplement with it to up it. And then it'd be this domino effect. So in this session, I will teach you how to identify ovulation, how to advocate for yourself of, no, this is when I need to be testing progesterone. This is what my lack of cervical mucus is telling me. This is what my low basal body temperatures are telling me. We're going to find out how to identify if your thyroid is suffering. So that's what I'm going to be diving into in that session.
So,
We are going
Haley,
to, yeah, please.
can I ask if somebody is not cycle charting, if you're like a new cycle charter or an avid cycle charter, it's good for both. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Wherever you are with it, whether you've been doing this for years, this is all foreign language to you, you will have some starting point to start identifying your fertile markers and what it is telling you. It can
And
be as simple as looking at your underwear for the cervical mucus, or if you want to get really into taking your temperature, or we can meet you
mhm,
wherever you are.
mhm. And I will say, especially for those who are cycle charting, um, once you actually start to work with a FAM practitioner, you will realize how much more there is to learn about
Yes.
understanding what it means to cycle chart. Because I've had a lot of clients who have done a lot of cycle charting, and they're just like, I didn't know half of this stuff. So,
Correct, myself included. I like
yes,
whenever I went into the FAM certification, I thought I had it down, and then I was
yeah,
like, oh, I didn't
okay,
know
yeah.
the half of it. So, I mean, of course, we won't be able to get into all of it in this 75-minute session, but you will have a really, really strong starting point and
Mhm.
bouncing off point. And then we are going to close out the day with a dear friend of mine. Her name is Mia Tardino. She is a registered yoga instructor with multiple trainings, and she uses yoga as therapy, and she's curated these beautiful women's circles where it'll be a time to tap back into that emotional body that Dr. Lou kind of opened up in the beginning. And we're going to take some time. It'll be more interactive. There's going to be journaling, there'll be facilitated conversation, again really bringing that piece of you are not alone, and kind of healing this collective wound, this collective sister wound of fertility and what we were never told about our bodies. So whether you just want to come and reflect and listen, or if you feel called to share, that space will be there for you. There may be some therapeutic yoga for fertility too that you can walk away with. And yeah, we're just going to sit together in circle. It's
So
virtual, so
exciting.
wherever you are in the
Yes.
world, you can join us. I might have some clients in the UK that might join us, all over the country. So that is
And so
there for
what,
you.
when is the date? When is it?
It is Sunday, March 5th.
Sunday, March 5th.
Yes. So just in
Yes.
about a month from when we're recording this. I
Hmm.
think when this comes out, we'll be in the middle of early bird. So early bird pricing will be available for about a week, and then there'll be 2 weeks after that that you can still join us. Yeah, I'm really excited.
Awesome.
We had the first year of it last year, and it was so cool. I think we had, that I know of, about a third of the participants went on to conceive and are either, I think they're really close to having their babies now, the two that I'm thinking of. So yes, you will walk away with
Yay.
a treasure chest of resources, of tools that you can take with you, whether you go on to conceive naturally, or what I also like to remind you of even if it does come to something like IVF or artificial reproductive technology, what you will learn and what you will do will also support that, will also increase your chances of conceiving, however it happens. It's a win-win situation.
Awesome. Well, the link for that is going to be in the show notes below. So if that is something you are interested in, I invite you to scroll down, click the link, and sign up. And Haley and I hope to see you there. So thank you so much, Haley, for
Yay.
joining me today and providing some and just sharing your story and just being able to have this fun conversation with you. And I'm sure I'll have you back on. So until then, I'll see you at the summit.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.